I hope you won't be disappointed. I'm pleased that given this disgusting sleet outside, I can go south with you. There are 29 degrees centigrade in Greece and approximately 9 hours of sunshine today in Greece. But this is definitely not the only reason why Greece is the mostly booked destination of Germans, even ahead of the Balearic Islands. We would like to take a closer look at the boom. We would like to see whether it is sustainable, whether it's just a flash in the pan, which benefits from the weakness of the neighbors, or whether it's a long-term recovery. I would like to introduce our experts. Please welcome Babis, Foskolakis, Misha Lehmann and Peter Strupp. I would like to briefly introduce our guests to you. I would like to start with the gentleman having the furthest journey. Mr. Foskolakis flew from Crete to Germany yesterday evening. He's the general manager of Sbokos Hotel Group. And the hotels very often provide beaches, beach holidays and culture, and they've received many international awards. He was born in Crete, and he has stayed in his home region until today. Although he spent his entire life there, he says, the island is so big that I don't know all the nooks and crannies of the island. I would like to also introduce Misha Lehmann. He came from Athens to see us. He works there for the German broadcasting station ARD. He's the radio correspondent, and he also reports from Cyprus. When he was a child, his father always was nagging him. He was a passionate fan of the old Greek language. He was able to speak this, and this was a little bit difficult for the children. He tried to impart this on the children. He didn't quite manage. Nonetheless, Mr. Lehmann ended up in Athens. He already spent a long periods of time in Greece as a student, and since 2016, he's been working for the ARD broadcasting station. I would like to introduce Peter Strupp, who studied the Greek language, and he also speaks not only the old Greek language, but the current Greek language, and this shows his great passion. He worked as a travel guide to finance his studies, and he's been working as a manager for Studiosus for 25 years. He also represents Studiosus in the Sustainability Council. We're going to talk about this later on. And Peter Strupp went to Greece for the first time in 1967 because his parents were enthusiastic and aficionados of Greece. He went there 80 times altogether. He's still very passionate. I'm looking forward to knowing who is more familiar with Crete of the two of you, but this is not our topic. No, but you're so passionate about this country. You're not the only ones. We've heard about the recovery, which started 5 years ago. There are records now. There are the cruise tourists. If you include the cruise tourists in a figure, the 30 million mark in terms of numbers of tourists has been exceeded. How can you explain the boom in your country? Tourism has always been an important sector for Greece. It has been very important for the Greek economy, especially since 2013. It is allotted it stands for more than 70% of the GDP, and this sector is very important for overcoming the crisis. It was in 2017 that tourism always stood for 20% of GDP, and in 2018 this will be approximately 21%. How come that your home country is so popular? Well, regarding your question, this upsurge, this boom, this is something which is linked to the comparative advantages of the Greek products. There are also many international challenges. In Greece, for instance, during the past 4 years, we've seen a strong increase of new source markets, such as China, for instance. That is guests from the Baltic states, from the Central European countries as well. There was also a strong increase in city tourism. Athens, for example, as a hub, benefited from this in the past 4 to 5 years. There's a two-digit growth. This is just one explanation. Why has there been such a significant increase in tourism? Well, Greece offers an interesting product, including many comparative advantages. There is this beautiful and very diverse landscape, nature, climate, people, culture, the security and safety. I have to mention this because this has played a major role during the past 4 years. But I also have to say that the problems of the state and the problems of Greek tourism have also a negative impact on a more sustainable development of tourism. We're going to talk about this in a little while, but I'd like to talk about the reasons. Mr. Lehmann, I suppose you were wondering about this as well. Well, from a German perspective, it's an impressive boom. If we take a look at the figures, 3.7 million German guests last year. I'd like to interpret this as follows. We in Germany, we've got a very good basis. We're interested in the country. This might also be due to the Greek history, of course. But let's take a look at southern Germany. The 1960s, a lot of guest workers arrived from Greece in Germany in the 1960s. They integrated themselves very well, better than others, I suppose. So things were growing. And now we've got a situation where in the neighboring countries we can see that things are exacerbating. Let's take Turkey as just one example. A lot of Germans do not want to risk anything and accept experiments during their holidays. In case of doubt, they say, I would like to avoid this and switch to another country. As far as the countryside is concerned, you can compare this. Turkey has a beautiful countryside as well. And usually we always have a quarrel between the colleagues in Istanbul and myself. We quarrel about who's got the nicer coastline. I'd say, well, we do in Greece. You agree with me. But there are the many islands which play a role. I think as far as mentality is concerned, there's a general understanding, and the rest is important as well. Next to safety and security, we need a good infrastructure. According to my experience, Germans are people who think individually as tourists. I think what German tourists like about Greece is authenticity and this honest ideas that if you go to a Greek pub, there are other developments. They are all the all-inclusive tourist offerings, but they are still the typical Greek restaurants, cafes, where Germans can find the authentic values they're looking for there. The Halles commercial book, the original is the slogan. I'd subscribe to this. There's some core to it that you can't destroy. You can't destroy it. It's very old as well. And this also enhances tourists' interest. But these developments are not recent developments, apart from the crisis in Turkey, of course. But, Mr. Strubb, it was quite striking to see that there was an increase, plus 70 or plus 60% in the past years of an increase of numbers of people going to Greece. You can see this at Studiosus. How can you explain this? Were you surprised about it? Well, we weren't quite surprised about it because we felt that there's a certain need to catch up. During the past 5 years, we couldn't see a continuous increase. You always remember only 2012 as a very bad year, where there was a significant drop. As of 2012, there's been a recovery in Greece. Generally speaking, the number of German tourists increased. As of 2013, then the figures were better than 2011, and we couldn't feel a boom until 2016. We felt it only during the past 2 years. And we think that there are several factors which kind of hindered demand of Greece. There was the year of the economic and financial crisis in 2012. Then you have to add the strikes and demonstrations on top of that. And then we had the typical German attitude. We were wondering whether we, the Germans, are still very much liked in Greece. The Chinese customers definitely didn't wonder whether the Greek people changed their idea, because usually the austerity measures were linked to Angela Merkel and Wolfgang Schäuble. And then a third issue was the refugee issue. So some holiday maker who would like to go to the beach arrives in Heraklia, goes to the hotel. He's not really interested compared to the situation in Samos or the Eastern Islands or in Athens or in close to the Balkan states. And these three factors result in a significant drop. But since there are no longer any headlines, and there haven't been any headlines in the press for the past 2 years, you do not talk about strikes any longer, about Germans not being popular. I hope that there are no longer photographs of Angela Merkel in Greek newspapers where you can see her portrait just like Adolf Hitler. These things are over. You can't see them any longer. So obviously this kind of drop in decrease had to be converted. And then there are the two phenomena that were mentioned. There is this core that you find Olympia and Delphi are things you can only see in Greek. I liked this idea about the Greek cafe. This is what I say when I go to Greek. Well, because the chairs are put outside and they're in the sand on the beach, and this is something that you can only find in Greece. Well, I have to admit that maybe this is slightly exaggerated, what you found in the media. There was the German flag. There were not more than 2 flags of Germany that were burned in Athens, but everybody, all the journalists broadcast this. But this time is over. We the media representatives definitely focus too much on some developments. Angela Merkel, for instance, in a Nazi uniform. This was just published in a minor newspaper where not a lot of copies are sold, but everybody then reprinted it, of course. The Bild-Zeitung German tabloid is also guilty of the development we all thought was bad. Well, they found a different approach when it comes to dealing with the country. So I think everybody has learned something and taken lessons. This was also some important lessons to be taken by the media, because you have to wonder or think about how you can deal in a bad way with the country, because sometimes media always tell the same stories. When I came home from my time there during the crisis, people asked me, how did you manage? Most of the time, supposedly people mistreated you because you were German. And I said, no, not at all. I was approached once by someone in Athens, and I was asked about the Nazi past of Germany. And after 30 minutes of discussion, we were almost friendly. So I can only encourage travelers, and I talk to the people if I see and feel that they want to talk, because they always have questions to us regarding the rich Germany, in inverted commas. But if you take a little bit of time, then, well, it's all possible.
Paradoxically speaking, can we say that the crisis also had a positive impact, creating something new? I mean, Greece was a topic for so long. I don't think that bad news raises interest. I don't think there's this kind of sensationalist tourism there. I would agree here that there's this one image sticking to people. Now we have this example of Barcelona and over-tourism. Once they slit the tires of a bus, and then we kept seeing this image repeated, and people saying that they don't want any tourists anymore in Barcelona, so that then sticks to people's minds. So I think the uniqueness of Greece lies in the many islands, and I ask my Turkish friends for understanding. They don't have as many islands. They have some 2 or 3 islands which are not of any touristic interest. So the Germans, they have this phenomenon with a small island. You've seen everything, and then you can go island hopping. And that's something other countries don't have on offer. But now we're talking about Greece. So, Mr. Foskolakis, now you, of course, having a hotel, you're interested in Greece using the boom, and you do have room for maneuver. You said that your home country of Crete is 3 times larger than Mallorca, but only has 1/3 of the guests, of the visitors or tourists. So what can you do so that you can sustainably take in all these visitors? Well, the example of Mallorca, I mentioned that only to show that qualitative tourism is important to us. So if the country is unable to do things, has certain structural problems. For example, general infrastructure is important for qualitative tourism. And I believe that infrastructure in Greece has always been deficient. And that is one of the reasons why tourism is not growing as it could when we're talking about Crete. Sustainability, that means not just sustainability in numbers, it's also sustainability for a better future for the whole world. And when talking about Crete, for example, Crete supports tourism under quality criteria, develops tourism under sustainability criteria. At the moment, for example, we have an international pilot program sponsored by TUI Germany and a non-profit organization here in Germany as well. It's a program, a pilot program, where hotel owners, local producers, municipalities in Crete participate. And we cooperate to produce a sustainable destination for products. And I'm sorry, my German is not perfect, which is why I'm struggling a bit. Well, probably better than if you spoke in Greek. Well, that's important to us, sustainability in tourism. Greece has to tackle the most important problems, which is basically infrastructure. It's always been bad in Greece. Then the particular infrastructure necessary for specific forms of tourism. Then one other big problem at the moment is the extremely high taxation in Greece. We are currently the country with the highest unemployment rate, even after 9 years of crisis. So we have the highest unemployment. We're the country with the highest taxation. Accommodation VAT was 6.5%, it's now 13%. Then we have VAT between 8, which used to be between 8 and 13, the general one, which is now 24%. Then income tax has risen from 26% to 29%. And now we have this new accommodation tax, which is 1 to 4 euros, depending on the hotel category, which has to be paid immediately by the visitor. It's per night and per room. Now, Mr. Foskolakis, you talked about 3 important topics, and I'd like to go through them one by one. You talked about sustainability, meaning that you should use tourism sustainably, but also the environment. And that also means that all Greeks were to profit from this boom. You also talked about particular challenges in your industry in terms of taxation. And maybe we could go through that. Yeah, and I'd like to add one more thing. Seasonality, that's also a big problem in Greece. We'll have to do it one by one, otherwise we won't manage. I think it's better to, do it one by one. So we'll start with sustainable use, Mr. Lehmann. There are always 2 sides to the coin. If you adapted infrastructure, would that then, would you wish for Crete to become a Mallorca? I would say no, but maybe I can give you an example. I used to go on holidays for many years, just basic holidays. We always said tents in cement or very easy, simple accommodation at the beach, going to taverns. And then we realized that it costs the same or even more for a family compared with a cheap hotel. I have a colleague who kept asking me, telling me, can you give me a tip? But I don't want to have too much to do with these people, and I don't want to go into private people's houses, but I want a nice hotel. And I gave them 2 or 3 recommendations, and he was disappointed. And then I realized, and in this case it was Kos, in the Dodecanese, that he'd been to hotels which weren't as he had imagined Greece to be, which is what Mr. Struck mentioned, this chair in the sand. That's exactly the problem. You can develop in the wrong direction. As a Greek hotel, you must not forget that there's this imagery, the imagination people have, their idea of Greece, and you have to adapt to that. I know many hotels in Greece where I'd say that they went in the wrong direction in their development. They are nice, they're elegant, they're expensive, but they're exchangeable. So if you want to be sustainable, and have sustainable success, then you need to have the Greek idea and develop that in the hotel. And there you have to be honest also when treating your own staff. They also have to be happy with what they're doing. And very often you can't pay for them as you should in a European country. We really have to say that this is far too little, not paid in the hotels, but generally speaking in Greece, young people have to somehow survive on several hundred euros per job, so they need 2 or 3 jobs to survive. This is still the reality in Greece, and we'll all have to make a change here. People, hotel owners, politicians, tourism industry, stakeholders, and so on, so that we can really have a sustainable boom. In August, the 3rd package is going to end. So what can we do? What can you do as an operator now to help? Now, certainly it's up to us and our partners to make some offers and to help the Greek state and the authorities. Of course, first of all, we have financial policy of a country. In 2012, the minimum wages were decreased by 15%, and they've remained there since. And if you look at Greek hotels, it's 700 to 800 euros, which are paid, officially paid per month, and that is just not enough. And we have to talk about that. You can say, okay, with the boom, more is possible. And it has to be distributed better because the boom is only arriving at very few points. Mr. Lehmann talked about the islands, the boom. I mean, you can have Mykonos and Santorini booming because that's where the flights go to, that's where the Chinese go to for their photographs. And Naxos and Ios and the other islands, hardly anybody goes there. So it's not distributed equally. Now, when talking about income, we can say, yes, income was cut by 15%, but that was also one of the requirements the Troika made, also Wolfgang Schäuble. That was the minimum. 15% was the minimum, but it's more has been cut, actually, than that in certain cases. Now, if you say that you wished for the staff to be able to have living wages, but who's going to pay for this pay gap? Would it be the hotel owners or would the customers be prepared to do that if you say, okay, the waiter who's so nice, he should also have a good income? Well, there's always competition about destinations, and Greece is certainly not expensive. It'll always be more expensive, of course, than Egypt or Turkey, also because of the different taxation system, but customers are prepared to pay the price for what they get, and they will get quality. We heard about that. And therefore they have to pay the price. If you think how cheap the flights are nowadays, people were not able to fly from somewhere in Europe to Santorini. Now they can do it for 89 euros. They wouldn't be able to afford it years ago. Mr. Foskolakis, how do you see that? Do you think that income could rise now? Or you also mentioned other challenges. You talked about the taxation. Well, the idea was that the Greek economy would be more competitive. It was supposed to become more competitive. And what happened during the time of the memoranda there, on the one hand, we had devaluation internally, so reductions everywhere, the state making cuts and savings. But on the other hand, competitiveness has improved. But this advantage got nearly lost because of the high taxation rates. The situation today is not so easy, unfortunately, if in answer to your question. What has been done was done with many victims. The workers were the victims of this. And as I said, we have a 15% cut in pay. But it's not only that, it's also the fact that we have seasonality which limits tourism. And this is something where Greece has to change. Certain attempts have been made, will be made, but at the moment we can't see too much in this regard. We have islands with a season which lasts 2, 3, 4, 5 months. Even Crete, which used to have a 7-month season, used to be full 7 months. Later, so many years later, when the touristic programs in Turkey and Egypt began, nearly lost half of the months. It's now May to mid-September. It's 5-6 months. Seasonality is something I also want to talk about, but I thought also what you said was important. You said a lot was achieved, but it was also because of the population. Not everybody is always happy with the ever-increasing tourism influx. In 2017, statistically speaking, one Greek had 3 tourists per capita, so to speak, and maybe it's not so easy to continue with hospitality. And is it difficult to have this hospitality if the pay is not fair? Yeah, so it's quite astonishing to see how come hospitality is still so good in Greece, although so many people have to admit that it's not enough to have a job as a receptionist in a hotel, or even worse, somewhere selling gyros, where they are working for many, many hours, very bad working conditions, and nevertheless they're always so polite. I believe that in the past, many people in Greece said, yeah, okay, we hope to be able to achieve something with this work. And if they have experienced tourism operators, or even if they just think about it themselves and they say, okay, if we begin earlier to offer things, then we can also attract more tourists, then it wouldn't be difficult to have a qualitative increase. Last weekend, I went walking just on my own, south of Athens, in a place I'd never been to, and I wonder why so few people are there, even few Greeks. Why are not more people enjoying this beautiful landscape now in early March? It's like paradise. I have my smartphone, and if I send pictures to Germany, then people are really astonished. They said, that's what it looks like now? Now, in real time? Yes. Yes, and you could fly to Athens. There are flights. So that's a point where I say, okay, of course, we can't save the whole situation just by that. I mean, especially when talking about infrastructure. Many people work during the high season so much. They work so hard that they need the winter months to recuperate. So maybe working hours would have to be distributed better. So if somebody has a hotel or a small tavern or hotel, then of course they'll be working around the hours. Everybody knows that. So it's not so easy to strike a balance here. But it's also very good, because then if you have visitors, then you just have to think as to how to handle things differently, how to make sure that people know that they can visit now. And I'm sure that people will be happy to fly to Greece even at a season where it traditionally was not the case. Even in November in the southeast Aegean Sea, you can go swimming. Now, you said, gave us a reason, so maybe some people really have to relax a bit, but that won't be the only reason. Well, that's again the hen and the egg problem. What came first? Now, seasonality in Crete or in roads, many attempts have been made to prolong that, but then the hotel owners say they need flights, and the flight operators say we're only going to fly to Crete in the winter season if the hotels are open, and then the clients say I don't want to be in a hotel if the taverns are going to be closed. And then about Mallorca, different destinations there have developed differently. You have cycling tourists who go training in February in Mallorca. Then you have hiking tourism. You have hiking paths with signs. Then you have golfing, maybe in Crete. You know, there are all sorts of things which could be done in a season where you couldn't go swimming. And in November, okay, next weekend I'm going to be in Athens and I'll probably also go swimming. It's possible, but not many people do that. Most of them want to go hiking, playing golf, cycling, visiting, but you need the infrastructure for that. And if then everything goes dark at the end of September on the small islands and nothing to be done anymore, then it's not so nice. And then the people with the restaurants will say, okay, we'll keep the restaurants open only if we have flights. But the flight operators say, okay, we'll have the flights, but only if we have hotels. Now, the hotels can open. 10 or 15 years ago, most 5-star hotels in Crete didn't even have a fitness room. And they said, well, Germans are supposed to go on a leisure holiday here. They don't need to tire themselves out doing fitness or sports. And then if you have wellness, spa and all that, those are things which Portugal and Madeira have, and Mallorca. And nothing of that was available in Crete. And then they said, we're going to build it only once we have the flights. So what's going on at the moment? Mr. Foskolakis, you said infrastructure is important and you want to extend the season. Are you in touch with anybody? Yeah, we want to do that. For me, infrastructure is very important, also for winter tourism, or the more important. So if the roads are not in a good state, if the beaches are not clean, so infrastructure for winter tourism is even more important. We would like to see that happening, but we'd need all stakeholders cooperating: the state, the operator, hotel owner, the local population, the municipalities. They all have to get together and set up a program. And that'll need some time to set it up. Is that something politicians are trying to deal with? Mr. Tsipras, has he taken this on? Yes, it is. It is. But at the moment, not very successfully, I believe. I've been at events in the middle of the year. A large tour operator celebrated the Acropolis group thing. We had the tourism minister there, and we realized that there are some initiatives. When they are there, they will then be picked up on, but they have to come from the outside. And in the ministry, just sitting down and having a kind of a startup, that's a bit difficult. But once an idea has been formulated and it needs support, then the support will come. And in the area of spa and the thermal baths, you have the idea of privatization. And then you can also use the requirements of the fiscal package and create so and so many projects. And then that would mean that you have also improved the infrastructure. But it's not going to happen in 2 or 3 years. If we're going to talk about the negative impact, this overdevelopment, as we saw it in Mallorca, that was a very long process. Now, if we want to do it correctly in Crete, for example, then you should not make the mistakes others made and try and do everything or as much as possible correctly in Greece. That would be the right direction. You as an operator, is that something you're interested in? We have something we haven't mentioned yet, or hardly yet mentioned. Their new markets, source markets is what you call them, more and more Chinese coming to Greece, Eastern European and Russians. In Santorini, for example, you said that 15 years ago it was basically German, and now there are very many Asians there. So what do you do as an operator there, and do you try to do anything in this direction? Because you say that Mr. Lehmann said very often ideas have to come from the outside. Now, what Mr. Foskolakis mentioned as a positive for the Greeks, new source markets, that's a challenge for us. That's, of course, the case. We have to talk to the hotel managers and see whether they want to give us their beds or whether they'd rather give them to the Chinese who want to take their wedding pictures there, or the Indians who maybe consume more in the hotel because they never leave the hotel, not like us who go on excursions. On the other hand, it's added value for us as operators to say we know when Santorini is vaguely halfly empty still. So you have to be at certain areas in certain parts of the island. You have to know when which cruise ship arrives and where is the location where the Chinese go for their sunset photograph, and we'll have to go to other places. I mean, that's a challenge, but that's something where a tour operator can also position himself. Do you proactively do something to help prolong the season? We offer that. We write it in the catalogue and say how beautiful Greece is in October, and that you can go to visit there and you can go swimming because the sea is still heated. And we try to get our customers there. They don't go only for swimming and the beaches there, but they go to visit, and the ideal temperature is what you just mentioned, 21 degrees, or as you said, 21 degrees in Athens is much better than having 35 degrees in mid-May and wanting to go and visit. But the customer has to understand that. And of course, the necessary infrastructure has to be in place. And smaller islands like Corfu, if we want to offer travels in April or even in March, then you need to have a direct flight. I mean, who wants to go via Athens or whatever, apart from the taxes you have to pay all the time, even for changing planes? But also Crete, you have all these direct flights, but they begin at the earliest in the spring holidays, Easter holidays. Some islands mid-May to mid-September only. At the end, I'd like to know what you three believe would be particularly important in sustainability terms. Mr. Lehmann, you as an observer maybe can judge the political dynamics in the industry also. What do you believe? Where do you believe Greece will be in 5 years' time? Politically, I would say it's very difficult to tell. Many people say that Tsipras, after his election in 2015, will have 1 year of peace at the maximum, and then it'll be very difficult, and he'll have to fight for remaining in power. And it's true that the polls are not very good, but we don't know what's going to happen after the next elections. But I think for many Greeks, that's not the point anymore. The Greek population has experienced so much. If you look back in history, and they've always been able to operate independently of politics, and I think in tourism that's all the more the case. In the economic sector, that's something that the economic sector will just survive somehow, so you don't need to worry about that. Now, with the other things, I always think of a honeybee. You don't have the big boom industry in the economy. And I don't think that tourism will be able to have the one idea where everybody will then say, okay, we need to go to Greece even more. I think that development has to take place everywhere at a good level. And like the honeybees, very many Greek hotel owners and staff will have to be flying to all flowers to keep within the image and try and find their honey everywhere. Infrastructure is a very important topic. And then with the people who are interested in Greece, not just in Germany, I don't see that there should be a problem. At the beginning, I was a bit afraid when we had the first direct flights between Beijing and Athens. I thought, what's going to happen in the city? What's going to happen in the country? Now I'm quite relaxed. If you talk with the Chinese, you will find that they're very open and they're particularly interested in Europe and Greece. And it's interesting to see how they now go to the Metera monasteries and are so fascinated by these old buildings and then relish their short holiday times because they don't have these long vacations as we have in Europe. Now, of course, you've also seen other things like with these cruise ships where you have masses of cruisers invading the country. But, of course, even on Santorini, you can find hours and places where it's nice and quiet. Now, you said that politics is not so important, but hotel owners, those are the people who are the industry operators, tourism industry operators, and that you, Mr. Foskolakis, what do you believe? Where are you going to be in 5 years' time? Will you be able to use the boom sustainably? A boom and a crisis can always be of benefit. You can learn, and we can always improve. I think Greece will have to invest into qualitative tourism. As I said, it's very important to improve infrastructure and the taxation policy will have to change as quickly as possible. And what we already have been doing is what I said previously, that we are using quality criteria. Talking about my island, Crete, we invest in sustainable tourism for the locals and for the tourists. That's the most important thing Greece can offer. Mr. Stubb. Greece in the next years, what do you think? Will they be able to benefit from the boom? For example, will they be able to extend the season? I think that the hotel owners have used the time very well. 20 years ago, when we said there were no swimming pools or infrastructure within the hotel, sports gym rooms and something, that was fine. They did that. But what is needed now is state-measured regulating tourism fluxes and hardware infrastructure. We haven't talked about airports yet. The most beautiful place in Crete is certainly not Heraklion Airport. It's a complete disaster. But Fraport has now taken over all sorts of airports in Greece and will invest there. And workplaces have to be created. It can't be that you have the tourists standing outside waiting there under the sun just because the hall is too small. That has to change. So, yeah, we got back to politics now. Thank you very much. We talked about all sorts of different topics. Thank you. I hope it was interesting for you, ladies and gentlemen. And I would now ask David Armand to take the floor. Where is he?